more contrast visible? And how wide does that tether appear to be? It seems to resemble a much wider strand than we'd expect. Can you describe which way the satellite is visible on that strand?
Satellite now 100 nautical miles.
Charlie, completely unzoomed, and you see the full extent of the tether. I tried to adjust the focus, but I can't get better than that.
Okay, Claude. Thank you.
I'm going to zoom in now.
In the summer of 1999, I met with Martin Stubbs, the program manager of the cable TV station, who had recorded over 400 hours of NASA's live broadcast. He gave me some videotape on a new incident that happened in February of 1996 on Space Shuttle mission STS-75, what was called the tether incident. So what you just saw on the videotape showed a 12-mile-long satellite, a satellite attached to a 12-mile-long tether, which is like a conductor cable. It's a very, very thin, 1/10 of a centimeter in thickness cable that was used to conduct electricity in the Earth's ionosphere. As we saw earlier, space is supercharged with high-energy particles, and NASA was trying to take advantage of these particles to see if they could build up a charge on the tether and actually see a gain or produce some electricity. They charged the tether with some electricity, but then an overload of highly charged particles flooded the tether and produced so much electricity it snapped. On February 25th at about 7:30 p.m., the tether broke away from the shuttle Columbia and drifted about 77 miles away. So the scene that you just saw actually starts at about 77 miles away. The camera pans down. We see a long line, which is 12 miles long, of tether, a small satellite attached to the end, and then a swarm of little objects, little balls of light, just moving in from all different directions and different velocities and different speeds. Then the cameras actually zoom in and we actually get to take a close look at what we're seeing here. It's astounding. We see up here in the right-hand corner, we see a very large disk clearly going behind the tether. And we can actually see little black dots racing around to suggest some sort of a magnetic field effect. And coming through the middle, we see another very large disk moving clearly behind the tether. The light from the tether shines in front of the background object, which is the UFO. If we use this piece of wood as an example, we can see what a disk looks like when it's passing behind a foreground object. It's really very quite simple. So if the disk was passing in front of the tether, it would look something like this, and it doesn't look like that. When we look in the middle and we see this large disk passing through the middle, we can see again it's passing behind the tether. If this was the tether and this was the UFO, we could clearly see it's going behind. And if it was going in front, it would look something like this. It doesn't look like that. So because we know the shuttle is at least 77 miles away and drifting further away from the object, from the tether, and we know the objects are going behind the tether, we can therefore use the 12-mile length of the tether as a relative measuring rod for actually making measurements of the minimum diameters of some of these disks. And according to my calculations, against the 12-mile length of the tether, this disk passing through the top section here measures a minimum of 2 to 3 miles in diameter. That's assuming it's right up next to the back of the tether. If it's actually farther behind the tether than I think, then the disk could be much, much larger. The further it gets behind it relative to the distance of the tether, the larger it actually is in reality and compared to measuring it against the tether. Again here, this disk going through the middle here, I estimate it to be between 2 and 3 miles in diameter. If a UFO were flying over the city of Los Angeles in the downtown core or New York, and it was 2 to 3 miles wide in diameter, it would black out the entire sky. It would be an Independence Day sized craft that would literally cause massive panic and massive alarm. But again, when you consider that the cameras on the space shuttle here are seeing into the near ultraviolet spectrum of light, as we learned earlier, it's a spectrum of light that's too high in energy for us to see with our eyes. But because the camera can see into it, it can basically be capable of capturing an image that is so high in energy that although we can't see with our eyes, it actually still is there. We just can't actually see it. Earlier I suggested how if a UFO were capable of doing light speed travel, a solid object initially, and it could change its frequency into high frequency energy, the UFO would still, or spaceship would still have actual structure to it. It would actually still have mass, but in its high frequency state it would turn into pure energy. Therefore, as it would appear on a camera, it would be very translucent. It would look like energy even though it has structure. And that's exactly what these objects look like. They look like almost transparent, translucent disks, which actually, as they pass behind some background stars, you can actually see starlight shining through them to suggest that they're in a pure wave or energy form. So, and again, this one, we can see the actual magnetic field rotating very, very quickly around the craft, suggesting that what we're looking at is pure energy, mass vibrating at a very high frequency. Across the top of the screen, we can see a very powerful pulsing coming off of one of the UFOs as it moves across the screen. Later, I would look very closely at the wave patterns on the UFO and study the wave patterns and find some incredible, incredible conclusions, incredible quantum physics and quantum energy equations. But we'll look at that much later. For now, we're left with the most astounding event ever captured on film. The largest UFOs ever captured on film, 2 to 3 miles in diameter, and quite conclusive. They're definitely going behind the tether. They can't be produced by some sort of an optical illusion. If this is the tether way in the background and the camera to the space shuttle is way up here, you can get a really bad reading against using the tether, the 12-mile length of the tether, as any sort of relative measuring rod. But I'm not doing that. We are confirming, and it's very obvious when you look at the tape, that the UFOs are going behind the tether. On February 28, 1996, United Press International published an article, Satellite Signals a Puzzle, mystifying the STS-75 tether incident. When the astronauts were actually able to regain contact with the tethered satellite, they found several unexplainable surprises. The article states, "There has been an event on the satellite that we do not understand yet," astronaut David Wolf told the Columbia crew. First, radio signals from the satellite caused engineers some surprise. The configuration of several systems had changed from when NASA lost contact with the craft on Sunday. For example, the spacecraft's nitrogen fuel tank was emptied and its steering thruster valves were opened. In addition, a gyroscope that had been left on was powered off, while 2 other gyroscopes remained on. All of these incidents require electronic, remote control commands from the astronauts on the shuttle. But if the astronauts did not make these commands, then who or what did? Could it have been the unidentified flying objects that took over the controls of the satellite? So take a look at the tape again and see for yourself if some of the things I'm saying are not true. Dear Mr. Sarita, if the phenomenon is interesting enough to deserve an investigation, then our preference would be for controlled experiments that closely duplicate the circumstances of the original observations and test our working hypotheses until they are either verified or falsified. A second line of investigation would be to obtain more evidence of the original sightings. For example, additional shuttle camera tapes. There are at least 4 mounted in the bay, to see if the same objects were seen on these. If these objects were large, then the same object would appear on 2 or more cameras, and these can be used to triangulate the distance from the shuttle to the object.